You think you know the man sleeping beside you? I believed that lie until I walked inside and found my 14-year-old daughter unconscious on the marble floor, a trail of blood on her forehead. Meanwhile, my husband was too busy erasing a text message to call an ambulance. The real monster was not hiding in the dark. He was wearing an expensive suit, my wedding ring, and getting ready to sell our lives to cover a deadly secret. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep producing the content you love. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even longer, feature more detailed situations we cannot publicize on YouTube, and include multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or comments. Now, let us dive into today's story with our protagonist, Autumn Webb. I assess disasters for a living. As the director of risk analysis at Atheros Nexus, my entire career is built on predicting the worst-case scenarios, calculating probabilities, and mitigating damage before it happens. But nothing could have prepared me for the catastrophic failure of my own life when I returned to our Seattle mansion after a sudden 3-day business trip. The first thing that hit me was the draft. The heavy oak front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my rolling suitcase freezing on the threshold. The foyer, usually pristine and bathed in warm light, was a disaster zone. The console table was overturned, shattered porcelain from my favorite vase scattered across the hardwood, and the Persian rug was bunched up as if a hurricane had torn through the first floor. Then, my heart stopped. "Harper!" I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat. My 14-year-old daughter was lying motionless on the cold marble floor near the edge of the living room. Her limbs were awkward, limp, and there was a terrifying, smeared trail of red just above her left eyebrow. I dropped my bags and scrambled to my knees beside her, my hands shaking so violently I could barely feel for a pulse at her neck. It was there, fast, fluttering like a trapped bird, but there. Footsteps thundered down the grand staircase. Julian, my husband of 10 years, appeared, his hair damp, his eyes wide and frantic. He was buttoning a wrinkled dress shirt, his breathing ragged. "Autumn, oh my God! You are home early," he gasped, rushing over and dropping to his knees opposite me. "I already called 911. They are on their way." "What happened to her? What happened to our house?" I demanded, my voice cracking as I cradled Harper's head. "A break-in," Julian stammered, wiping a hand down his pale face. "I was upstairs in the shower. I heard a crash. By the time I threw my clothes on and ran down, the front door was open and Harper was on the floor. She must have walked in on him. He pushed her as he ran out." He reached out to touch her arm, and his hand was trembling. It looked like the perfect picture of a terrified father. But my mind, trained to detect anomalies, logged a strange detail. If he just threw his clothes on in a panic, why was his shirt perfectly tucked in at the back? Why was there no wet footprint leading from the bathroom to the stairs? Before I could question it, the piercing wail of sirens shattered the tense silence. Red and blue lights flashed through the living room windows. The paramedics rushed in, 2 heavy-set men with medical bags. The lead medic, a broad-shouldered man with a name tag that read Marcus, knelt beside Harper. He moved with a calm, practiced efficiency that instantly grounded the chaotic room. He checked her pupils, felt the bump on her head, and bandaged the small cut. "She is going to be okay," Marcus said, his voice deep and steady. "It looks like she fainted from pure panic and hit her head on the way down. The laceration is superficial, no major trauma, but we need to get her to the hospital for a full evaluation, just to be safe." A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. I leaned back, clutching my chest. Right at that moment, Julian's phone buzzed aggressively in his pocket. Instead of ignoring it like any normal parent would while their child was being loaded onto a stretcher, he flinched. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face drained of whatever color was left. "I have to take this. It is the police calling back." Julian muttered quickly, turning on his heel and stepping away into the shadows of the dining room corner. I watched him go, a cold knot forming in my stomach, but my attention was pulled back when Marcus suddenly went entirely rigid. The paramedic had paused mid-motion while strapping Harper to the board. His eyes were locked on the dining room. I followed his gaze. He was staring at Julian's profile, illuminated briefly by the hall light as my husband paced back and forth, whispering furiously into his phone. Marcus's jaw tightened. The professional calmness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating glare. The other medic lifted the front of the stretcher, and Marcus took the back. As they moved toward the front door, I grabbed my coat to follow them. Marcus paused right at the threshold, blocking my way for a fraction of a second. He reached out, pretending to guide me around the debris, but instead, he pressed a small, crumpled piece of medical tape into my palm. His hand closed tightly over mine. He leaned in, his breath brushing my ear under the noise of the idling ambulance outside. "He is not Julian," Marcus whispered, his voice laced with a grim certainty. "Do not believe this burglary. Debt collectors never leave empty-handed." Before I could process the words, Marcus pulled away, his expression completely blank, and pushed the stretcher out into the damp Seattle night. The sterile smell of the hospital room offered no comfort. I sat beside the narrow bed, holding Harper's small hand. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound anchoring me to reality. Julian was pacing in the hallway outside, his phone pressed to his ear again, playing the role of the distraught father making arrangements. Harper stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her pupils darted around the brightly lit room before locking onto me. Panic instantly seized her features. "Mom," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "I am right here, sweetheart. You are safe now," I murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair away from the bandage on her forehead. She squeezed my fingers with surprising strength and pulled me closer. Her breath trembled against my cheek. "They did not want my laptop or your jewelry," she breathed, her eyes wide with lingering terror. "There were two of them, men in dark jackets. I heard them tearing up the living room, and one of them kept yelling that they needed to find a black hard drive. They said if they did not find it, they would take something else." A cold chill cascaded down my spine. Burglars do not demand specific storage devices. They grab easily pawned valuables and run. The piece of medical tape clutched inside my coat pocket suddenly felt like a burning coal. When Julian walked back into the room, wearing a mask of exhaustion and concern, I forced my facial muscles to relax. I stood up and embraced him, burying my face in his shoulders so he could not see my eyes. "The police said it was likely random junkies." Julian sighed, stroking my back. "We will upgrade the alarm system tomorrow. I promise. Autumn, I will never let this happen again." "I know you will not," I replied smoothly, playing the part of the shaken, trusting wife perfectly. While Julian stayed at the hospital to handle the discharge paperwork, I told him I needed to go home to pack a small overnight bag so we could stay at a secure hotel. The moment my car pulled into our driveway, the frightened mother vanished, and the director of risk analysis took over. I stepped over the broken porcelain in the foyer and headed straight for the utility closet. Julian claimed the intruders smashed the security router, cutting off the camera feeds. The physical box was indeed shattered on the floor, but physical hardware is just a shell. I booted up my encrypted work laptop and accessed the cloud backup logs for our home network. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing commands to trace the exact timeline of the network failure. The data did not lie. The system did not go dark because the router was destroyed by blunt force. The administrative access log showed a manual disconnect command issued from an internal Internet Protocol address. I cross-referenced the address. It belonged to Julian's personal smartphone. The network was shut down intentionally, exactly 10 minutes before Harper was found unconscious. He had opened the door for them. He had invited the wolves inside. My chest tightened as if wrapped in barbed wire. I pulled out the crumpled medical tape, There was a phone number scrawled on the back. I dialed it. 2 hours later, I was parked at a desolate highway rest stop on the outskirts of the city. Rain lashed against my windshield in heavy sheets. The passenger door opened, bringing in a gust of freezing wind, and Marcus slid into the seat. He wore a dark raincoat, the collar turned up against the chill. "I was not sure you would actually call," Marcus said, his deep voice barely carrying over the sound of the storm. "You said he is not Julian. Who is he?" I demanded, skipping any pleasantries. Marcus stared out at the rain-slicked asphalt for a long moment. "His real name is Elias Vance. Many years ago, he was a mid-level financial grifter working out of Chicago. He was smooth, so smooth that he managed to con an underground credit syndicate out of a massive sum of money and vanished without a trace." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "How do you know this?" "Because my older brother was one of the accountants forced to help him do it," Marcus replied, his jaw clenched tight. "When Elias disappeared with the cash, the syndicate held my brother responsible. They ruined him, bankrupted his business, destroyed his life. He recognized Elias from a photo once, but no one believed him. Tonight, when I saw that profile under your hallway light, I knew instantly, that is Elias Vance." The pieces of the puzzle began snapping together with terrifying precision. A black hard drive, debt collectors who never leave empty-handed. I thought about the financial files Julian had casually asked me to sign over the past several months, claiming they were just routine tax documents for our joint accounts. He was not just hiding his past, he was using my current identity. My mind raced through the implications. My high-level security clearance at Aetherius Nexus, my pristine credit. Julian had leveraged my spotless professional reputation to borrow millions of dollars from a ruthless Chicago money laundering gang. He had likely promised them a massive return on their dirty cash, using my firm as a fake guarantor. The men who broke into my house were not looking for a quick score. They wanted the hard drive containing the ledger of his debts, the shattered vase, the torn rug, the manual shutdown of the security system. It was a final warning. They had come to collect, and my husband had offered up our home, and almost our daughter, as collateral. "He is in deep," Marcus said quietly. "If they are showing up at your house, it means time is up. They will come back, and next time, they will not just leave a bruise on your daughter." "I know," I whispered, the trembling in my hands completely gone now, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. "They will not get the chance." Returning to the hotel where we temporarily relocated felt like stepping onto a theatrical stage. I pushed the heavy mahogany door open and found Julian sitting in an armchair pulled right up to the edge of Harper's bed. He was reading aloud from one of her favorite fantasy novels, his voice a soothing, rhythmic baritone. When he saw me, he paused, offering a gentle, reassuring smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He reached out to stroke Harper's hair, playing the role of the devoted protector to absolute perfection. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to wrap my hands around his throat right then and there. Instead, I kissed the top of his head, tasting the bitter ash of my own forced affection, and whispered that I was going to take a shower. Later that night, when Julian finally succumbed to exhaustion and his breathing leveled out into a deep, even rhythm, I slipped out of our hotel suite. I had retrieved his personal laptop during my trip back to the house. Sitting in the dimly lit business center in the lobby at 3 a.m, I plugged a small flash drive into his machine. It contained a military-grade spyware program I sometimes use to run vulnerability tests on rogue corporate servers. Within 20 minutes, it bypassed his standard passwords and unearthed a hidden, partitioned drive buried deep within the system registry. The folder was heavily encrypted, but Julian was a grifter, not a cybersecurity expert. It took me less than 2 hours to crack the algorithm and open the contents. What I found inside systematically dismantled the last 10 years of my life. It was a comprehensive, meticulously detailed escape plan. There were forged passport documents for Elias Vance, but that was not the worst of it. The core of his strategy was a drafted script designed to exploit my high-level administrative credentials at Aetherius Nexus. Julian had been silently logging my keystrokes for months, capturing the authentication protocols I used to access the firm's emergency reserve investment fund. His objective was clear. He intended to initiate a wire transfer of $15 million. The documents laid out the exact sequence. He would route the money through a series of shell companies to pay off the Chicago syndicate, wiping his ledger clean. The remaining balance was ticketed for an offshore trust in South America, specifically a beachfront property in Argentina, and he was not planning to enjoy the sunset alone. A subfolder contained flight itineraries and email exchanges with a woman named Chloe. The messages were dripping with promises of a new life, funded entirely by my destruction. Because that was the final piece of his masterpiece. Julian was not just going to steal the money, he had orchestrated the digital trail to frame me for the embezzlement. When the auditors finally realized the $15 million was missing, every single piece of evidence would point to Autumn Webb. I would go to federal prison for decades, and he would disappear into the southern hemisphere with his mistress. Sitting in the cold, flickering light of the computer screen, the agonizing pain of betrayal evaporated. It did not leave behind sadness or grief. It left a hollow, freezing void that quickly filled with a rage so absolute, so blindingly pure, that it felt like a physical weight in my chest. A normal person would have printed the documents and driven straight to the police station, but my career was built on calculating risk and understanding corporate warfare. The legal system is slow. Detectives take weeks to build a case, and a man like Elias Vance would use that time to vanish into the wind, leaving me to untangle the mess he left behind. No, law enforcement would only give him a chance to run. I did not want justice. I wanted total, undeniable ruin. I wanted him to lose everything he valued, and I wanted to be the one holding the match when his world burned down. I closed his laptop and opened my own. I began laying the foundation of a financial guillotine, using a series of encrypted virtual private networks. I spent the next 4 hours creating a complex web of phantom bank accounts across 3 different international tax havens. I drafted a labyrinth of dummy corporations, each one verified with synthetic identities that did not exist anywhere on the grid. Then, I logged into the Aetherius Nexus main server. Using my executive override, I carefully unraveled a tiny thread in our firewall. I created a fake security loophole, a digital backdoor specifically tailored to recognize the exact routing protocol Julian planned to use. It looked like a clear, unguarded path straight into the company's reserve vault. In reality, it was a steel trap. The moment he attempted to execute his massive transfer, the system would not just block him. It would lock down his local drive and instantly reroute the funds into the phantom accounts I had just built, severing his connection to the Chicago syndicate entirely. The bait was set. The stage was mine. I closed the computer, watched the sun begin to rise over the Seattle skyline, and smiled. The hunt had officially begun. The following Monday, I walked into the executive boardroom of Aetherius Nexus and pitched the perfect crime scene. With a calm, authoritative voice, I proposed that our firm host a massive charity gala at the most exclusive 5-star hotel in downtown Seattle. I argued it was the ideal opportunity to reassure our strategic partners and court the city elite after a volatile financial quarter. The board agreed immediately. The event was set for exactly 3 weeks later. When I brought the news home, Julian could barely contain his delight. He masked it under the guise of being a supportive husband, pouring me a glass of expensive wine and massaging my shoulders. He even insisted that I should be the one to deliver the keynote speech. He suggested a comprehensive presentation that would keep me on the main stage, visible to hundreds of people, for at least 45 minutes. I smiled and agreed, watching the greedy anticipation dance behind his eyes. He thought he was a genius. He believed he had just been handed a 45-minute window of absolute freedom to plug in his drive, execute the massive money transfer, and use my public speech as his ultimate alibi. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he never realized I was the one building his scaffold. Before I could spring the trap, I had to remove my only vulnerability, Harper's safety was my absolute priority. 1 week before the gala, I told Julian that the trauma from the break-in was still affecting her and that I had enrolled her in an exclusive, week-long wilderness therapy retreat for teens. Julian, eager to have no distractions during his heist, packed her bags himself. In reality, there was no wilderness retreat. I had quietly liquidated a personal offshore account and wired $75,000 to an elite private security firm staffed entirely by former military contractors. They intercepted Harper's transport halfway out of the city and escorted her to a fortified safe house deep in the Cascade Mountains. I gave her a secure satellite phone and hugged her tight, promising her that when she returned, the nightmare would be over. With Harper untouchable, I went on the offensive. Late on a Tuesday night, parked in a rented car far from my own neighborhood, I powered on an untraceable encrypted burner phone. Using the ledgers I had decrypted from Julian's hidden drive, I dialed a number belonging to the lieutenant of the Chicago Syndicate. The line rang twice before a gravelly, deadpan voice answered. "Who is this?" the man demanded. "A concerned citizen," I replied, my tone flat and fearless. "I am calling to tell you that Elias Vance is alive, well, and currently wearing a very expensive wedding ring in Seattle. I am also calling to tell you that he is planning to leave the country this weekend, and he has no intention of paying back the money he owes your employers." There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. The air in my car felt instantly colder. "Why should I believe you?" the man finally rasped. "Because I am going to give you his exact location," I stated. "This Saturday night, starting at 8 o'clock, he will be attending the Icarus Nexus Charity Gala at the Grand Emerald Hotel. He will be distracted, completely unarmed, and preparing to steal $15 million to fund his escape to South America. Do whatever you want with that information. Just make sure you do not miss the party." I disconnected the call, snapped the burner phone in half, and tossed the pieces into a nearby storm drain. The wolves from Chicago had their scent. Now, I needed to invite the hunters. Returning to my temporary office space, I spent the next 10 hours compiling a master dossier. I printed every single piece of evidence I had meticulously extracted from Julian's computer. I included the forged passport applications, the flight itineraries to Argentina, the romantic email exchanges with his mistress Chloe, and the undeniable digital footprint of his attempt to steal my corporate credentials. I bound the documents together alongside a heavy, encrypted flash drive containing the raw data logs. I placed everything into a thick manila envelope and mailed it directly to the Seattle field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I attached a formal letter claiming status as a corporate whistleblower, detailing an imminent case of massive wire fraud, identity theft, and international money laundering. I gave them the time, the place, and the name of the man who was about to press the trigger. The night of the gala arrived. The Grand Emerald Hotel was a vision of absolute opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the grand ballroom. Waiters in sharp white coats glided through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. The room was packed with the wealthiest, most influential figures in the city, entirely oblivious to the silent war about to unfold around them. Julian stood by my side near the entrance, looking devastatingly handsome in a bespoke black tuxedo. He greeted our corporate partners with a warm, magnetic smile, shaking hands and playing the perfect, charming spouse. He leaned in and kissed my cheek, whispering how proud he was of me. I looked at him, admiring the sheer perfection of his performance. He was standing in a brightly lit, 5-star hotel ballroom, surrounded by wealth and prestige, completely unaware that the doors had already locked behind him. He thought he was the architect of the perfect crime, stepping into his grand finale. He did not know he was already a ghost, walking straight into a glass cage where the air was rapidly running out. At 9:15, the ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. The string quartet had transitioned into a lively waltz, and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Julian leaned in, his hand resting gently on the small of my back. He kissed my cheek and whispered that he needed to use the restroom before my big speech. He smiled, a perfect, practiced curve of his lips, and slipped away into the crowd. I watched him go, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. I did not need to follow him to know exactly where he was heading. He walked right past the restrooms and ducked into the temporary administrative office the hotel had set up for our event staff. Down the hall, hidden from the music and the lights, Julian locked the heavy oak door behind him. He sat at the main terminal, his hands trembling with adrenaline. He pulled the encrypted flash drive from his tuxedo pocket and shoved it into the port. I had programmed my smartwatch to mirror the server logs, so as I stood in the ballroom, I felt the silent vibration on my wrist. He had logged in using my administrative credentials. He was inside the vault. He initiated the transfer, $15 million. Destination, the labyrinth of shell companies he believed would wash the money clean before sending it to Argentina. He clicked execute. He sat back, ready to watch the loading bar fill with a comforting green confirmation. Instead, the screen violently flashed a blinding, blood-red error code. A digital siren icon pulsed in the center of his monitor. The text read, "Transaction denied. Critical security breach detected. Funds diverted to internal quarantine." My firewall had snapped shut. The $15 million slammed into the digital wall I had built, bounced off, and safely rerouted back into the deepest, most secure vault of Aetherus Nexus. The system immediately locked down the terminal, freezing his screen on that glowing red failure. His connection to the outside world was severed. The money was gone. His leverage with the cartel was gone. His escape was gone. Panic, raw and unadulterated, must have seized his chest. The watch on my wrist buzzed again, indicating a total system lockout. I smiled and handed my empty champagne glass to a passing waiter. It was time. Julian tore the flash drive from the computer, his breathing erratic, sweat breaking out across his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He unlocked the door and sprinted down the carpeted hallway, desperate to find me, desperate to figure out how the system had failed him. He burst through the side doors of the grand ballroom just as the overhead lights dimmed to a dramatic low. A single, brilliant white spotlight cut through the darkness, landing squarely on the center stage. I stepped up to the acrylic podium. The low murmur of hundreds of Seattle elites fell to a hush. Julian pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his eyes wide and frantic, searching my face for answers. He mouthed my name, but I did not look at him. I looked at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice echoing powerfully through the surround sound speakers. "Thank you for gathering tonight to support a vision of a better future. We are here to talk about transparency. We are here to talk about the truth." I reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on a remote control. I did not talk about charity funds. The massive, floor-to-ceiling, high-definition screen behind me roared to life. The sudden burst of light made the front row flinch. A high-quality audio recording blasted through the speakers, drowning out everything else. It was Julian's voice. "The $15 million will be secure by the time she finishes her little speech." His recorded voice echoed, dripping with arrogance. "I am leaving Autumn holding the bag. The auditors will find her credentials on the transfer logs. She is going to federal prison, and we are going to Buenos Aires." The screen displayed crystal clear, hidden camera footage from his home office. It showed him smiling, whispering sweet promises into his phone. Then, the screen split. On the left side, the video continued to play. On the right side, high-resolution scans of his money-laundering ledgers scrolled rapidly, exposing every single illegal transaction he had made with the Chicago syndicate. His forged passports, his fake identities. The name Elias Vance flashed in massive, undeniable letters across the display. The entire ballroom, packed with the most powerful people in the city, descended into a paralyzed, horrifying silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Hundreds of pairs of eyes shifted from the damning evidence on the screen to the man in the tuxedo standing frozen near the front row. A sudden piercing gasp shattered the quiet. It came from a woman standing 3 rows behind Julian. She was wearing a stunning red silk dress. Holding a clutch so tightly, her knuckles were white. It was Chloe. He had actually invited his mistress to the gala, intending to leave straight for the airport together after the theft. As she stared at the screen, reading the emails where Julian detailed how he planned to use her bank accounts to filter the stolen cash, the realization hit her like a physical blow. She realized she was not his great love. She was his backup scapegoat. She covered her mouth, backing away from him in sheer terror. Julian spun around, his face drained of all color. The mask was completely gone. He was no longer the charming husband or the sophisticated investor. He was a trapped rat. The murmurs began to rise, a tidal wave of shock, disgust, and whispered accusations washing over him. He looked back at the stage. Our eyes finally met. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply stood under the spotlight, looking down at him with the cold, detached expression of an executioner watching the blade fall. He broke. He turned his back on the crowd, shoving his way frantically through the stunned guests. He abandoned me. He abandoned his mistress, and he abandoned his fake life. He bolted for the heavy brass doors at the rear of the ballroom, intending to escape through the kitchen corridors and vanish into the Seattle night. He threw his entire body weight against the doors, bursting out into the dimly lit service hallway. He took 2 steps and froze. The hallway was not empty. Blocking the only exit to the loading dock were 3 men. They did not wear tuxedos. They wore sharp, dark suits that fit poorly over broad, muscular shoulders. The man in the center, a towering figure with a jagged scar cutting across his jaw, stepped forward. He reached into his jacket. His eyes locked onto Julian with the dead, soulless gaze of an apex predator. The Chicago syndicate did not miss the party. They had come to collect. The scarred man took a slow, deliberate step forward, his massive hand reaching out to grab Julian by the throat. Julian whimpered, his back pressed hard against the brass doors. But before the mobster could make contact, a deafening shriek of sirens ripped through the cold night air, echoing violently off the surrounding skyscrapers. Red and blue lights exploded through the frosted glass windows of the service corridor. I had timed my whistleblower package perfectly. The heavy thud of tactical boots vibrated through the floorboards. The scarred man froze, his dead eyes shifting from Julian to the flashing lights outside. He muttered a violent curse under his breath, realizing they were walking into a federal raid. The 3 men in dark suits immediately turned on their heels. They pushed their way through the kitchen double doors, seamlessly blending into the panicked crowd of chefs and waiters, abandoning their prey to save themselves. Julian was left completely alone. He gasped for air, his hands shaking wildly, but there was nowhere left to run. The exterior loading dock doors were kicked open with earth-shattering force. A dozen federal agents wearing heavy tactical vests swarmed the corridor. Assault rifles were raised. Flashlights cut through the dim lighting, blinding him. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, keep your hands where I can see them. Get on the ground right now," the lead agent bellowed. Julian did not even have the strength to kneel. He simply collapsed. 2 agents grabbed him by the shoulders, slamming him face first against the nearest wall. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed like a final judge's gavel. The lead agent began reading a laundry list of charges that I had hand-delivered to them: massive federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and conspiracy to commit corporate embezzlement. They hauled him up and dragged him back through the grand ballroom to march him out the main entrance. The sea of wealthy guests parted instantly, pulling their expensive gowns and tailored suits away in sheer disgust. Julian stumbled, his tuxedo ruined, his face pale and slick with sweat. Then he saw me. He planted his feet, fighting against the grip of the federal agents just long enough to look at me. His eyes were wide, pathetic, and filled with a desperate, begging terror. "Autumn." "Please," he cried out, his voice cracking horribly. "Please, tell them it is a mistake. You know me. Put in a good word. I beg you." I stepped down from the acrylic podium. The entire ballroom held its breath as I walked slowly across the polished floor. The rhythmic clicking of my heels was the only sound in the room. I stopped inches away from him. I looked at the pathetic, broken shell of the man I once thought I loved. I did not feel pity. I felt absolute, glorious triumph. A sharp, cold half-smile touched the corner of my lips. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper that only he could hear. "This is the exact price you pay for daring to let my daughter bleed." The last shred of hope vanished from his eyes, replaced by the hollow realization of his own destruction. I nodded to the federal agents. They jerked him forward, marching him out into the lobby. I followed just far enough to watch the grand finale. Local news vans were already swarming the hotel entrance. As Julian was pushed out the glass doors, a blinding storm of camera flashes erupted. He tried to hide his face, but it was useless. The heavy metal door of the police cruiser slammed shut, sealing him inside a cage he would likely never leave. He had lost his freedom, his pristine reputation, and the millions of dollars he sacrificed his soul to steal. 1 month later, the storm had finally passed. I sat on the plush velvet sofa of our new house, a fortress equipped with the highest-grade security system money could buy. I held a crystal glass of rich red wine, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip. The warm evening light filtered through the bulletproof windows. Across the room, Harper was curled up in an armchair, laughing brightly into her phone as she talked with her friends. She was safe. She was happy. Resting on the coffee table in front of me was a small, plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single piece of lined paper with a handwritten note. It contained only 2 words, "Thank you." I knew it was from Marcus. The debt that ruined his family had finally been paid in full. The scales of justice were perfectly balanced, marking the flawless end to a ruthless game of survival. Thank you all so much for listening to today's story. It truly means the world to me that you took the time to hear this journey. Where are you tuning in from today? Please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story captivating, please consider helping us keep the channel alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our very best exclusive, true stories that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the comments section. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next story.